Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's wolfnyc, WOLFNYC.com. Steve Barry, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very nice to have you. Just by way of quick introduction, you are the author of a new novel titled The Atlas Maneuver. You've also authored 22 other novels. And this particular book that we're talking about today, The Atlas Maneuver, I think is the world's first novel where Bitcoin is the plot, actually. So, wanted to have you on to talk about this. And to get started, before we jump into the novel itself, maybe we could just start with a little bit about you, your professional background, and your journey into discovering Bitcoin.
Well, I was a lawyer for 30 years, so I practiced law for a long, long time. And I first started writing in 1990. But from the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word was 12 years. It was a long time. I wrote 8 manuscripts during that time. 5 went to New York houses. They were rejected 85 times. I made it the 86th time, 12 years after I started.
Wow.
So it was a long process for me to get published. That was The Amber Room in 2003. Since then, there's been 22 more books, and 18 of those are Cotton Malone stories, which is what this is, part of the Cotton Malone series. 5 are standalones. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to make writing a career, that I could actually do it full time. And I don't practice law anymore. I haven't for a while. And I'm always on the lookout for new subject matters, things that are a little bit not as known as other things are. I like things from the past, things lost, forgotten. But those things from the past have to also matter today. They have to still matter in today's world. Like, who cares at the Amber Room? Who cares about whether this treasure is out there or this is out there? It still has to have relevance today. Mm-hmm. So I have those 2 elements that have to always be in my novels. Bitcoin fascinated me because, frankly, I didn't know the first thing about it. I mean, I had no clue what it was. I mean, it was. I knew it was something on a computer. I knew it was ones and zeros in a computer program. Beyond that, I had no knowledge one way or the other about it. But it was interesting. It was fascinating. It was something that I hope would hold a reader's attention. And so I fashioned the Atlas Maneuver around it. And I think your assessment is correct. I don't know of another thriller where Bitcoin is the plot of the book, not just mentioned or used, but the whole plot revolves around Bitcoin. And that's what this book does. Because one of the purposes of my novel is I want to educate folks. I want them to know what it is. I want them to understand it to some degree and not it be so mysterious. And that's one of the functions of my novel is to inform. My number one function is to entertain. So there's a lot of things in here that entertain and go off into various directions.
So how were you actually introduced to Bitcoin? And then was writing this novel part of your own learning journey?
It was definitely part of my learning journey because I was introduced to it by listening to folks talk about it, particularly around where I live. There are people who invest in it. Mm-hmm. So they're very knowledgeable about it. And I was fascinated by it. I was just listening to them talk and listening to the aspects of it. I started asking questions. And the more I asked questions, the more I realized this might make an interesting thriller. But of course, I have to have, I got to have a plot. I got to have, something, that drives a story forward. Mm-hmm. And eventually I came up with something that works with Bitcoin at the heart. And I was able to explore a lot of aspects of Bitcoin in the novel.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm surprised no one has done this yet, actually. We're, 15 some odd years into Bitcoin, and I guess it's
Mhm.
just now getting to that level. So you've been writing, you said, for 30 plus years.
Mhm.
I am also an aspiring writer. I've published a couple of things online. I haven't yet to write a book. As I was sharing with you before we got started, I struggle to maintain a consistency with my writing discipline, especially when I'm doing other things. The podcast has absorbed a lot of my time and attention the past few years. Do you have a particular process or pattern that you follow for writing? Do you write at certain times of day? Do you try to, I don't know, do you have any tips or tricks for other
Sure.
aspiring writers out there?
Well, I teach writing a lot. I've taught around 4,000 students. I have a foundation called History Matters. We raise money for historic preservation, and we do that by going into communities and teaching writers workshops.
Mm,
And the money we raise from the workshops goes to the restoration projects. And so I've taught a lot of writers, and I began to see some consistent things from talking to writers. Um, Writing is a discipline. It is a discipline. There's no question about it. You have to have some form of discipline. Now, that is can be very varied. Example would be Diana Gabaldon, who writes the Outlander series. Her discipline is she works from midnight to 5 a.m.
hmm,
That's where she works. That's her productive time. That's her discipline. That's how she makes it happen. I know other writers who work at night from like 7 to midnight. I am a morning person.
mhm,
So I write in the morning. And when I was a lawyer, I wrote from 6 to 9 every morning. And then
mhm,
I would get to work after that. Today I do 7 to 11 and take a break and then come back and go to about 2 o'clock. It's about 5, 6 hours a day.
mm,
You have to find the time when you're most productive, set that time aside, and write every day. And I try to do 1,000 words a day. 1,000 words is a good day for me.
mhm.
Now a lot of people may say, well, that's not a lot of words. It's like 4 pages. Well, that's just true. It's only 4 pages, but you have to make up every word.
Right.
And every word you make up has to go with every word you made up the day before and the day before that and the day before that. It's not a stream of consciousness where you just sit
Right.
down and write the stuff out. So for 1,000 words is a good day.
Yeah.
And now writing is not an obsession. You don't get obsessed with it. And I don't. To this day, I only work 5 days a week.
Mhm,
If I want to work on Saturday and Sunday, I do. But if I don't feel bad about it.
mhm,
I'm fine. But on
mhm,
Monday morning, got to go to work.
mhm,
Got to go to work and go in there from Monday to Friday and knock it out because I have a deadline. And the number one job of a commercial fiction writer is to deliver their manuscript on time.
mhm,
That may sound fundamental and easy, but you'd be surprised how many writers don't deliver on time.
mhm,
And it's a common problem. So you have to get that discipline that works for you, make it work, and stick to it. And
mm,
once you get going in it, it's kind of easy after that because your mind gets geared to that.
Interesting. I've heard from other writers that a common approach is to really do everything you can to get that first draft put out. So I've heard I've heard someone say that you should write fast, bad, and wrong initially, and then you go back and edit, 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 edit. That's where it really comes out. Is that an approach you take, or do you try to edit as you write?
But one of the rules of writing is rewriting. So
Okay.
you're exactly right. I go through my novel about 50 to 60 times. I
Wow.
literally read the book 50 to 60 times. I read it so much that I never want to read it again as long as I live. I never want to read it ever again. I read The Atlas Maneuver 50 to 60 times.
Wow.
And I'm doing it for different reasons sometimes. Sometimes I'm looking for verbs. Sometimes I'm looking for echoes in the
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
Most of the time I'm reading for continuity to make
Yeah.
sure it all goes through and fits and
Right.
makes straight. And that's the ones you got to read very carefully. So I agree with you. The first draft, get it out of you. You know,
Mhm.
as I've gotten older and the more I've written, my first drafts have become a little more polished than they used to be because I'm a little more careful in what I do. I adhere to this. I write 50 pages. I edit 50, I write 50 more. I edit 100, I write 50 more. I edit 150, I write 50 more. And I keep going. So by the time I get to the last 50, I've done the first 400 or so 30 or 40 times at that point. So I like to kind of produce as I'm going. Now, I know other writers who don't. They write the whole draft, then go back and start over and do the edit all the way through. It's whatever really works for you. But I found that the way I do it is good for me, and that's how I like it.
So when you're working, you said about 6 to 8 hours a day writing, that would include that rewriting process you described.
Oh, yeah.
Of going back. Okay. So the writing is
yes,
the
and research. And the research.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Any strange techniques that you yourself use or you've heard others use that might be something outside the box that writers could try and employ in their own writing habits?
You have to clean your head out every once in a while. I know that, like, Dan Brown has written that he likes to hang upside down. That's how he clears his head out. You look like you work out a lot. So you probably, that would be your way of getting your frustrations out. And getting that.
I get actually a side effect. I was working out before I was writing, but I find now when I go to the gym, I get really good thoughts and I'm jotting them into my notepad for writing later. So it's become like an accessory to writing.
That's exactly what it should be, because your brain relaxes. And as your brain relaxes, you can think clearer. For me, I play golf. That does it for me. And a lot of times I play by myself. I just go out and I take a notepad and I play. And I'm not really thinking about the golf game. I'm thinking about the plot.
Right.
But I found that I play better golf when I think about the plot, which is really interesting. And I plot better when I play golf. So they both work well. So you have to find something that releases that out of you and gives you that release. I know some writers who play tennis. I know writers who jog. I know some others like you who work out. Everyone has an avenue where they can clean their head out and reset.
So is that establishing the mind-body connection? Is that the benefit that's coming through there when you say clean your head out?
Absolutely. You've got to clean it out, because what happens when you write, you're going to get stuck. I mean, you're going to get stuck multiple times a day, and you've got to figure out a way to unstick yourself. And for me, it's go hit some golf balls or go do something like that. Or sometimes I'll tinker around the house, something that takes my mind off of what I'm doing. You can't sit there all day long and stare at something and hope it's going to come. Gotcha. It'll come when it comes.
So writer's block, is that how you deal with it? If you feel it sitting at your desk an hour 4 on a Tuesday, you say, I need to just go hit some golf balls to conquer the writer's block?
Well, I define writer's block differently than other writers do. Getting stuck, to me, is not writer's block, because that is a common occurrence, getting stuck. You're going to get stuck constantly. Writer's block is much more serious. People ask me all the time, why do I write? And the answer is simple. It's not being flippant either. It's a simple answer. You write because you have to.
Yeah.
You have to because you have a little voice in your head that tells you to write. Now, it doesn't tell you to write a bestseller or sell a bunch of books or do all that. It just says, I need you to write. I don't care what it is. Just please do it, and I will hush. I had that little voice for 10 years during the 1980s, and I completely ignored it. I finally listened to it in 1990, and I realized what it was. And now today, after being at this for so long and teaching writers and being with writers, I know every writer has that little voice in their head. They're born with the voice in their head. Now, they're not born with the ability to write. You have to learn that. But you are born with the motivation to write, the voice that's driving you forward. And for me, that little voice, when it goes silent and quits talking to you, that's writer's block. And that means you're done. You're finished. And I know writers who the little voice has quit talking to them. And when it quits talking to them, they're finished. And that's a sad time, because you're done then at that point. That to me is much more serious and problematic. And I sadly, from teaching writers, About 90% of all writers do not finish what they start. That's a sad statistic, but it's true. And one of the things I like to do when I teach is try to get people over that so they don't quit and they keep listening to the little voice in their head.
Mm. Wow. So that sounds pretty fatal then. I thought writer's block was something like a temporary symptom you encountered at times you needed to conquer.
It's a block. You're talking about block. You just blocked. Okay.
Yeah.
That happened 5 times this morning for me.
Right. Okay. Got it.
But writer's block, when you're done, you can't actually do it anymore. That's a much more serious illness.
And then if the voice goes out, you're done. You're done writing, basically.
I know.
You've never had that problem though, or you haven't encountered that yet.
Not yet. It's still going in me, but I do know writers where the voice stopped and they lost the drive to do it.
Is that voice equal to just having something to say, basically?
Well, it's part of it because the voice is telling you, I need you to do this. I need you to have something to say. Mm. I don't want you just to think about it. I want you to express it. Mm. And it pushes you and it pushes you. And I had that voice all during the 1980s. I remember it very well, driving me crazy. Say, you need to write a book, write a book, write a book, write a story, write a thriller, put it down, write it. I'd say, no. Then finally one day I said, okay, I can't take it anymore. And I did it. And the voice went quiet. When I did that, it goes quiet. But now when I stop, it comes back.
Oh, okay.
And it's still to this day. If I don't write for 2 or 3 days, the voice says, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get to work. What's going on? I would say, well, I had to take these days off because I had to do interviews and I had to travel here and I had to go here. Voice says, I don't care. Get back to work. Get back to work. That's what drives you forward. That's what keeps you going.
That's fascinating. I'm trying to reflect if I have that or not. I mean, for me,
you have to have it.
First of all, I'm not a fiction writer like you. I don't read a lot of fiction. But I do have this deep, I don't know if it's an intuition / motivation that the way reality works, there's like this radical reciprocity in the structure of reality. And, it's maybe this is biblical to some extent, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. The nature of language tells us a lot about the nature of reality. And I've also found the nature of money, which is like the language of value, tells us a lot about the nature of reality. So I have this deep curiosity about that. Like, what can we learn by studying language or studying money that will teach us about how things actually work? And I don't know, I guess that's a philosophical type interest. But yeah, I don't know. It's
have to write it down is the little voice talking to you.
Yeah.
Urge to write it down.
Yes.
You have written it down. You have done it.
I do write a lot, but it's struggling to find the words to capture this. Like the intuition you have in your mind is more of a, what do we say? Like it's a perception. You're visualizing a dynamical system or something. And it's like, how do you put words to that thing? And I found really good writers, like especially in, like Neoplatonism and stuff, some of these crazy philosophers, they've done a really good job of putting words to these sort of dynamics. And I don't know. I think I'm still probably somewhere in like the 1980s in your years, right? Like it's telling me to speak. I'm still in the research phase, trying to find my words. And I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but
you've got the little voice in there. What you're talking about is a craft problem where you have to learn how to express it, but you'll learn how to do that. I did. I had to be taught. I had to teach myself the craft of writing. It's a craft. You have to learn it.
And what was your technique for learning the craft? Was it obviously a lot of reading, I assume, to begin with, and then where did you go from there?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, in this world, there's no such thing as a writing teacher. No one can actually teach you how to write, unfortunately. But there are people that can teach you how to teach yourself how to write. Now, that they are. And I was lucky to find some folks like that who helped teach me how to teach myself how to write. And I did. During those 12 years of rejection, I taught myself the craft of writing. And I learned the do's and don'ts. I learned how to do it, and I learned it by teaching myself. And that's the key to writing. You have to teach yourself. You have to be harder on you than anybody else is. And you have to learn the craft, and you learn the craft through trial and error.
Mm.
And it's a long process. It's a long, arduous process to learn the craft of writing. Unfortunately, today, we have a lot of folks printing books. They just put them down there, self-publish them, and throw them out there. And they're not really learning the craft of writing. They're just expressing what's coming out of their brain,
Right.
and just putting it down there, which there's something to be said for that. But it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to just express yourself, that's wonderful. If your goal is to be a commercial fiction writer, that people buy your book, tell other people about it and read it, and then you keep doing it over and over again, that's not such a good way to learn how to do it. So for me, I had that 12 years of rejection where I could teach myself the craft. And eventually, when one of my books got bought, I think I was ready to go forward at that point. I wasn't great at it, not perfect at it. I don't profess to be that way. I just profess to be a little better at it today than I was yesterday. And tomorrow, I hope to be a little better at it than I was today. And that's all you can ever hope for with a writer, that you just get a little bit better every day.
Yes.
Never perfect, just a little better at it every day.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Constant, continuous improvement. If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate the guidance. That's definitely something I'm thinking about a lot. Let's talk about your novel, though. So, as we said earlier, this is the first ever novel where Bitcoin is the plot. Maybe we could start with just a synopsis. I know I don't want you to give away the ending or anything, but maybe you could just give a general overview of what this book actually is about, and I guess explain as much of the plot as you can without giving away the ending.
I'll try to. I don't want to give away any of the surprises in the book, but the book deals with a couple of things. All of my books deal with something from the past, something lost or forgotten that I hope you want to know more about. And I hope I want to know more about it, because I got to spend a year and a half reading about it. So it's got to be interesting to me, and I hope it's interesting to you. And in this book, we deal with Yamashita's gold. It's an actual treasure from World War II. It happened at the end of the war when the Japanese had plundered all of Southeast Asia, and they had billions and billions in gold and diamonds and jewels, and they had all this wealth, and they could not get it to Japan because we had cut off the sea. The sea routes were completely cut off. There was no way they were going to get anything out of the Philippines and to Japan. So General Yamashita went to the northern part of Onyusan, and went to the northern part of the island and dug 175 caches in the ground and put this gold all over all over that island. They were, how do you find the gold? There's one map. There are symbols in the rocks, in the trees. They left all kinds of things on the ground that only the ones who knew what they were looking for could find them. And then they left, and they booby-trapped all of those 175 as well. Yamashita was captured after the war. By this point, the OSS knew about the gold. They knew that there had been something going on in the Philippines. Yamashita was not going to be very cooperative, and they certainly did not want him alive to talk about it. So they quickly convicted him of war crimes and hung him. He was convicted and hung in about 80 days. Happened very fast. His chauffeur broke. and told the OSS where some of the gold was located. And the story is that America found some of the caches of gold, removed it from the ground, transported it across the globe, secreted it away, and created something called the Black Eagle Trust. The Black Eagle Trust was used to fund covert operations around the world, and some say it's still being used to this day. Is that true? I don't know, but it makes for a great thriller. So in my book, that gold is now in the possession of a single bank, the Bank of St. George, which was the oldest bank in the world. It was disbanded in 1805 by Napoleon, but in my book, it keeps going, and it's still there to this day. And they control this gold. And this bank also has a connection with Bitcoin that goes back to 2008 when Bitcoin was created. And because of that connection, the bank is very knowledgeable and knows, they have everything on Bitcoin. They created it. They know every ins and out. They know every detail of it. I created my own version of Satoshi Nakamoto. I have my own version in the book. And then it goes from there. The CIA and the bank are at odds. They're at war. My hero, Cotton Malone, is thrown into the middle of this war, and they're battling each other to try to stop what's happening. Which the bank plans. The bank plans to use the gold and Bitcoin for some very nefarious purposes. So it's a fun thriller. I hope it's going to educate the reader on Bitcoin. I made a point to try to make sure that I incorporated every aspect of Bitcoin I could into the novel, so the reader would get a full appreciation for it. And in the end, there's a happy ending. There's a good moral in the end. So all is well when it's over.
Fantastic. You were telling me offline before we started that this book explores what you consider to be a flaw or a potential flaw, let's say, with Bitcoin. Is that something we could talk about? I don't know.
Talk about a little bit of it. Yeah,
Okay.
I won't give away the plot because it's explained early on in the novel. Bitcoin prides itself on its anonymity. And it's not absolute anonymity, but it's pretty good anonymity. I mean, as far as you have your wallets and you can see the transactions, but you don't know who owns those wallets and you don't know who's making those transactions. So I think you pointed out it was sort of pseudo anonymity, and that's true. That's true. But it provides a nice protection. And in my book, since my bank created Bitcoin, they have control of a large volume of Bitcoin, millions of Bitcoins, in fact, unbeknownst to anybody. And in my book, we've gone a step further. Not only has Bitcoin caught on around the world, but about 15 to 18 countries have adopted it as its national currency. And most of those have even gone a step further and made it their reserve currency. So I've gone a little further down the road than we are right now in reality. So if you control that many Bitcoin, you could actually affect the price of Bitcoin by buying and selling among yourself. This wallet sells to this one sells to here, just go back and forth. And the bank has the gold to back all that up. They can make all that happen and go back and forth. So with that in mind, it was just this little flaw. If someone had it right now, there's 15, 16 million active Bitcoins out there, 19 total, but I think about 20% of those are lost or gone. So if you controlled 5 to 6 million Bitcoin, you'd be in the catbird seat pretty much. You pretty much could control the price of Bitcoin. Yes, you could. And if your purpose is to control the price in order to control those national economies, now you got yourself a thriller. And that's where mine comes from.
Yeah. So this bank has effectively cornered the market, but they are a outsized market participant in Bitcoin because they have see a third of the total supply in their possession. Also an outsized market participant in gold because they control, I don't know what percent, but a very large percentage of the total gold supply.
Unaccounted for gold.
Unaccounted for gold. And then you're saying they're using their two outsized market positions to basically manipulate the price of Bitcoin, right? You could sell Bitcoin into gold or vice versa. I guess you're going to pump and dump gold, pump and dump Bitcoin. And because these other countries rather have adopted Bitcoin as their reserve currency, that it gives them undue influence over these national economies. So
It does.
that's okay.
And they use it to their advantage to make money and help their customers. Now, granted, it's a thriller. You got to suspend the belief a little bit here,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a plausible idea. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
plausible. It's not completely in the realm of fantasy, but it allowed me to talk about Bitcoin in a broad sense, so that the
Mm-hmm.
reader could get a really good understanding of how it works.
Yes, and that is, again, I wouldn't say that's maybe a flaw of Bitcoin per se. It's a flaw of really any high concentration of ownership, right? If you have
Absolutely,
a market participant that has 20+% of which, by the way, this is a problem with central banks. Central
absolutely.
banks today own 20 to 25% of the global gold supply, and they use it to manipulate the shit out of the gold market.
And one of
Uh,
the characters in the novel says that exact same thing. Actually
yes.
says that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly correct. Yeah.
So it's a great, yeah, definitely makes for it's the makings of a great thriller, right? To have someone or one group, let's say, that has these outsized market positions and exploring what influence they could impose on the world through those outsized market positions. Um,
We
can,
also deal with fiat currency too, because a lot of people don't understand that the dollar bill in your wallet is worth not even the paper it's printed on. It
right,
has no it has no intrinsic value other than that someone else thinks it's valuable.
that's right.
That's
Yes,
its intrinsic value. And a lot of people don't really understand that.
yeah. Talk about suspended belief, right? That's
Yeah,
that's a
right,
real
right,
suspension
right.
of belief there.
A lot of people don't really understand that $5 bill, if I bring it out, that $5 bill has no value unless you think it has value.
Yes, and that it's a whole strange confidence game because the only way the dollar ever had value originally is because it was redeemable for gold.
Correct.
And then there's kind of a rug pull, right, in
Let's
1971.
go. Let's
But as
go.
but as long as well, yeah, it goes from gold backed to basically now it's petrodollar, right? It's backed by black gold, more or less. So yeah, it's an interesting. This is you get into the psychological aspects of money and things get really strange.
There's a whole little aspect of the novel where I discuss money because I wanted people to understand, we used to trade salt, we used to
Mhm.
trade goats, we used to trade cattle. There's all kinds of things that had value as
Yes.
money. And then we decided to trade hard metal. And then we decided, no, let's get bills of exchange that we can change. And then they went back to hard metal. And then they said, well, we don't need that. Let's just print what we can. And everybody
Yes.
just believed in it. So it's fascinating. The whole aspect of money is fascinating, and the book deals with that and explains that.
That's great. I will definitely have to check out that particular part of the book. Um, the Bitcoin origin story in your book. You mentioned this Bank of St. George, I think, and you mentioned the CIA. Can you go into the origin story that your book puts forth for Bitcoin?
Sure, it won't give anything away either. I went with the CIA story. There's all kinds of theories of where Bitcoin came from.
Hmm.
I heard the CIA story and I thought it was fascinating that in 2008 we were in the financial crisis. The whole system was about to collapse.
Hmm.
Nobody knew what was going to happen, and we came very close to a collapse. We really did, close to it,
Hmm.
but it didn't happen. But prior to that, the CIA comes in and says, we need to create a peer-to-peer transfer system in case the central banks crash and everything goes to hell. We've got a peer-to-peer system so people can still do transactions.
Hmm.
And supposedly, per the legend, that Bitcoin was created from that so that it would be in place if we needed it to make it happen. Well, it didn't collapse, and Bitcoin was created, and then it caught on, and then it kind of got a life of its own. And then the CIA kind of said, we'd like to get rid of it. And then, no, we can't get rid of it now.
Hmm.
It's kind of running itself now. We're not going to do it. And it just kind of went on from there. And some say that's why the CIA and the government are very negative towards cryptocurrency, and while they spread the information that they spread as a way to create fear of the cryptocurrency so that people won't use it. Really, cryptocurrency is for criminals. Criminals
Hmm.
use it, or it's for people trying to hide their money and avoid taxes, or they're trying to do something nefarious. They try to make it sound worse than it is.
Mm-hmm.
In this negative PR campaign that I read about quite a bit. And I included that in the novel as well. I went into that aspects of it. So I like that whole CIA story. But in the novel, the CIA and the bank are at odds with one another, and it's coming to a head. And they're at war now. When my hero, Cotton Malone, gets into the middle of that, he's in the middle of this war between the CIA and the Bank of St. George. And the Atlas maneuver is at the core of that war.
Interesting. Okay, so the protagonist is Cotton Malone, who you said has appeared in many of your novels. Who's the antagonist in your novel?
She's a lady named Catherine Gledhill, who runs the Bank of St. George. And she's the one who is putting the Atlas maneuver into place.
Okay.
And she's the one that's making it happen. And she's the one that's bringing these countries in to get them to go on to the Bitcoin standard, and then to go on to the reserve standard, and to bring them, to get them as dependent on Bitcoin as she can, because she controls Bitcoin. She has the control. She's the person in control of it because she controls those 5 million coins. And so she's the antagonist of the book. And so then there's my other character, Kelly Austin, who is, my creator of Bitcoin. And so between these three, the novel plays itself out. It goes from Luxembourg and then to Switzerland and then to Morocco, up into the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where the Atlas maneuver was born.
Okay. So you said Katie is your creator of Bitcoin, so she is your Satoshi, basically.
No, Kelly is. Kelly is my
Kelly.
Satoshi.
Kelly.
Katie Gledhill, and you said Katie because that's her nickname, Catherine Katie Gledhill. Kelly Austin worked for Catherine.
Got it. Okay.
And so she is my Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah.
Okay. So then it was in this story, the bank is colluding with the CIA that created Bitcoin.
They were, but now they've broken off and said, we don't want you anymore. We're doing this on our own now.
Right.
And we're in it together because in my story, the Bank of St. George was the administrator of the Black Eagle Trust.
Okay.
They were part of that trust. And then, and there is some, I read about the Black Eagle Trust. There is some that said that actually did happen, that after a while, there became a lot of friction within the trust and the intelligence community. Some say the trust was broken up 30 or 40 years ago. Some say it never existed. Some say it still exists today.
So then Kelly was the software engineer or something behind Bitcoin inside of the bank? Got it.
He created blockchain in my book.
Got it.
He's the blockchain creator in my book, as Satoshi would be in real life. Yeah.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE.
And then where does he fit into this whole conflict?
He gets drug in as a favor to help out somebody to kind of keep an eye on Kelly Austin, to make sure nothing happens to her. And then all hell breaks loose. And he just kind of gets drawn in at that point. But there's a connection between Kelly Austin and Cotton that he doesn't recognize until he gets to her. And there's a personal thing going on there that no one knows about, not even him, until he gets into the middle of it. And that's what makes the story much more interesting. There's a thing when you write a thriller, your characters have to have a motivation for going forward. They have to, what makes them go forward? What makes them do what they're doing? Well, you have to have that. You have to have that motivation. Now, in my case, Cotton Malone is a retired Justice Department operative. He lives in Copenhagen. He owns an old bookshop, and he just wants to be left alone. He doesn't want to be bothered. But if his former boss shows up and she's in trouble, he's very loyal to her. He will help her. If his girlfriend's in trouble, he's going to help her. If his son's in trouble, he's going to help him. He has a friend who's in deep trouble. He needs his help. He's loyal to his friends. He's going to help him. If Cotton, we need you to go save the world for us. He doesn't care. I don't care about that. That's not my job. That's not my job. So we don't, we call that the crucible is the fancy term, the crucible. That thing that gets a character to do what they normally would never do. And in this case, he does a favor. And when that favor's basically over, something else happens that forces him to go forward and do something that he would normally never do.
Interesting.
Crucibles have to be believable, they have to be immediate, and they have to make sense. They have to have all three of these things. Otherwise, you would say, well, why is this guy doing this? I mean, why is he putting his life on the line? Well, for what? Even Superman had a crucible, if you remember. Superman, it was always Lois Lane was in trouble.
Right.
And if Lois gets in trouble, Superman's going to act.
Right.
They recognized after a while that Superman just can't go around saving the world all the time. There's got to be a little more to it than that.
Right.
And thrillers have to have the same thing. And in this case, Cotton has a very deep and personal crucible that drives him forward.
So this crucible is then some personal motivation to the character that causes them to do something they would not be expected to do. Is that what you're saying?
Or normally would never do.
Okay.
Or normally would never do. What's that crucible? For Katie Gledhill, it's greed.
Right.
Her crucible is greed, to go forward. For Cotton, it's a little deeper than that. Kelly Austin has a crucible that forces her to do something she would never do.
Right.
As well, all characters, good and bad, have to have a crucible. That's one of the lessons you learn in learning how to craft a novel. You've got to have a crucible, otherwise it's a fairy tale.
Right.
It's not a story.
And so this would be like a revelation of their most deeply held values, perhaps, but just not something challenge. You can't explicitly say it in the novel. It has to be demonstrated through action. Correct. Right.
Correct.
It's not like your antagonist, Catherine, is going to say, my primary motivation is greed. It has to be enacted somehow.
You have to watch what she does, and you realize she's greedy.
Right.
That she doesn't need this. She just wants it. I just want it is what I want. And I can't help myself. I want more and I want more. Right. And to get more, I'm willing to hurt people to do it.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. To capture the drama. Very essential. I'm just reflecting on a lot of these. I told you I was reading some of this. I'm reading Hegel right now, old philosopher, and he gets a lot into to drama, how it's so essential to the nature of reality. And I think it comes out in fiction where you can't just explicitly say this is what this person is. It's people reveal who they actually are through action, and that's what makes for dramatic engagement.
We call it another thing too. We call it conflict.
Yeah,
conflict is essential in a story. And the best conflict of all, the greatest conflict you can create is the conflict of the human heart. Because we can all relate to that. You can always have people arguing with one another or fighting with one another. That's one form of conflict. But the truest form of conflict is a conflict of the human heart. And in this case, Cotton has that. He has a conflict of the human heart that forces him to do something he would never ordinarily do, but he has no choice. He has to do it. And it explains to the reader, why does he do that? Why would he go and do that? Well, okay, I see why. I do it too. Right. I would probably do the same thing. That's what you try to do when you try to show the conflict of the human heart.
So you are trying to, I guess, create situations of moral ambiguity, perhaps, or moral conundrums that the reader can then empathize with, like, oh shit, it's kind of a rock and a hard place. This is what the guy is choosing to do. And that's what pulls you in, right?
That's what gets it, because you can then become that character. And that's what you
Mm.
want the reader to do. You want the reader to become that character and go, well, what would I do? Well, I'd do that. Yeah, I probably would do that. Now, in Catherine's case, they probably may say, well, I may not do that. But then again, she's talking about billions of dollars. I don't know what I'd do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's that moral conundrum, that conflict of the human heart. And you need that in a story. Otherwise, again, it's just a fairy tale if you don't have that.
Yeah. Wow. That's super fascinating. Okay. Namesake of the book is The Atlas Maneuver. I just finished actually listening to the book Atlas Shrugged for the first time about 6 months ago. I don't know if you've ever been through that book. Phenomenal.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
It's a tough one. It's a long
It's a hard read.
Yeah. The audiobook was much more accessible for me just to do it as I was traveling and whatnot. What I wanted to ask you is, what is the actual maneuver itself? What is the Atlas Maneuver? Where does it get its name? And how does it relate to the plot?
Well, I named it because it was created in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where Catherine Gledhill has a home.
Mm-hmm.
So it was created there. And it's the Bank of St. George's way to manipulate the world's financial systems. It's their way of using Bitcoin to their advantage to maneuver. But there's a caveat to it. There's a trick to it. And there's a surprise to it that we can't tell the reader. But there is a surprise to it where things don't quite go as planned. And that's what makes for a good thriller, that you don't know what's coming. And there will be a surprise in the book for the reader. Yeah.
Can we reveal anything about the maneuver as it's presented earlier in the book, as it pertains to how the antagonist is using it to, I guess you would say, coerce certain countries?
Well, you mentioned on it. What happened is, let's just say my book, I have like 18 countries that are on the reserve currency level. Right now, there's only one. I'm not even sure El Salvador has adopted it as reserve currency, though.
Yeah, it's a legal tender, I think.
A legal tender there, but not reserve currency. But in my book, we've gone further. And they're about to bring on a whole bunch more. They're about to bring in more into the fold. So the Bank of St. George has a lot of customers. They do a lot of commercial financing, a lot of customers around the world. And let's say they have a customer who needs something from El Salvador, and the government's not being cooperative, or where they can't get it done. Well, it'd be an easy matter to manipulate the Bitcoin price, lower the price, affect the national reserve of El Salvador, put a little strain on it. The country gets a little nervous. The bank comes in benevolently and says, well, what's the problem? You having a problem over there? What is it? Well, hey, I think we can help you with that. And they start reversing the Atlas Maneuver and reselling back and forth, bring the price back up. They save the day. The government's very, very grateful. Oh, by the way, could you help us out with this? Yeah, we can help. It's a way to manipulate. You don't use it all the time, and you don't use it every day, but it's there if you need it. And it's just sitting there. And imagine if you had that power. Imagine if you had the power to affect the national economy. Now, they're small countries, granted, but there's a lot of people that make a lot of money in small countries, and so it was just an idea that came to me. And it also allowed me to teach the reader about how Bitcoin works, how it sells and buys and goes back and forth and moves around, how it all happens. Because as you said earlier, I can't just tell you that. I need to show you that.
Yes.
That's what I like to do.
That's really cool. It's, I guess, a demonstration of how money is power, even at the geopolitical scale, right? It's the primary instrument of power in the world, as far as I can tell. That's cool. Okay. I want to read one excerpt, if you don't mind. And I didn't know this at the time. This is your Satoshi Nakamoto, basically, speaking. And this is in the final chapter of the book. And she's giving an interesting description of Bitcoin, which I didn't know you had actually lifted from the book we co-authored, which is Thank God for Bitcoin. So I I'm one of 8 co-authors on the book, so apparently I did not write this particular part because it did not jump to mind when I read it. But I thought it was cool, and I wanted to just ask you about it. So I'll read it first. You write, "Books are amazing," Susie said. "Words on a page that transport us. We can switch off from everything, never notice the time passing, and experience smells, sounds, sights, and emotions from all over time and place. It's like chewing gum for the eyes." He'd always liked that phrase. She was always clever with words, yet for all the cleverness, she'd also had an insatiable yearning for adventure, just like him. "Bitcoin is like a religious experience," Susie said to him, "like Christ himself." He smiled, a bit blasphemous, but I'll bite. "How?" "Both had a humble beginning. Christ in a manger, Bitcoin appearing on the internet. Each a gift to the world, both loved by everyone. Bitcoin, like Christ, plays no favorites and lives forever. The establishment hated Christ, and today it also hates Bitcoin, since it, like Christ, flips the money changers' tables. They are also both a central source of truth, selflessness, and morality, and they encourage the world to stay peaceful." How do you figure that? "It takes money to fight a war. Money nations borrow. To borrow, they just create more of their own money, devaluing their own currency. You can't do that with Bitcoin. It's finite. So if everyone used Bitcoin, there'd be a limited amount of money to wage war. Countries literally could not afford to fight. And finally, both Bitcoin and Christ work as a savior, starting revolutions." Bitcoiners are often accused of being cult-like and perhaps exhibiting some religious-like zealotry. And fair enough. I think, you could say that. But then again, we have "in God you trust" on the US dollar, or "in God we trust" on the US dollar. And there does seem to be this unavoidable social construct element to money, right? So there's a cultural, if you want to call it a belief system, whatever, I don't know. There's a social element, right? Money is what we believe it to be in a way. That doesn't make it totally arbitrary and subjective, but there is this element of where we place our faith or place our trust.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question would be, in your own journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, what parallels have you drawn between money generally and religion?
Well, both rely on elements of faith. There's no
Mhm.
question there's elements of faith in both of those, but money itself relies on elements of faith. I mean,
Mhm.
just even more so than Bitcoin to some degree,
Mhm.
elements of faith. I got that whole concept from your book, basically,
Mhm.
of the connection between Christ and Bitcoin. It fascinated me. I had a friend of mine who turned me on to it, and it was his phrase, "chewing gum for the eyes."
That's a good one.
That was his phrase. I asked him if I could use it, and he said yes. I mean, it was a very good. When he said it to me, I went, "That's really good. I like that a lot." So that connection is there. Now, this is historical fact. Money was based on gold in the 19th century up into the 20th century. And World War I is when it first started, where governments got control of their own economies in Europe, and they printed money to finance the war and didn't worry about backing it up with anything. This is when it first started, when it very first started. And our Federal Reserve System comes along shortly after that, when it comes along in that regard. But it happened first overseas, where they started just printing money. And once the war was over, governments liked that. They liked the ability to print money and control it. So they never went back to having to back their money with an asset.
That's right.
That was a big mistake, because now a government basically has an unlimited piggy bank.
That's right.
And I mean, they can go further. Now, what the effect of the unlimited piggy bank is everybody else's money gets lower and lower and lower as that happens. But the great thing for the government is almost no one recognizes that. They don't really know that. They don't understand what's happening there. So with Bitcoin, if it was the reserve currency of everyone, you couldn't do that.
Mm.
There's only 16 million active coins right now. That's
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
That's all. If you want to print money and base your money based on your Bitcoin, you've got to have Bitcoin to back it up.
Right.
And so I read that somewhere. I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly where, but I read somewhere that wars would be hard to finance
Yes.
under that continuum. And if you recall, in the 19th century, what happened was governments had to go borrow money to wage war.
Right.
And the Rothschilds made billions loaning to both sides.
Mm-hmm.
They loaned to both sides in the war. So kings and emperors had to go borrow money literally to wage war in those days. So I found that very fascinating. So I wanted to work that all in, and I wanted to get the reader to think about this, think about what we're doing here.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClemente last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221.
Fantastic point. The book, The Bitcoin Standard, explores a lot of those dimensions where the printing of money expands the scale and severity of warfare, like in World War I and World War II. And yeah, I would say that is the ultimate promise of Bitcoin, right? That's something that almost universally people could support, is a technology that actually restricts the government's capacity to wage war, right? At least if they're going to wage war, let them wage it, make governments finance it from their own balance sheet, right? Let them use their own war chest. Don't hyperinflate the currency and take everyone's savings down with them. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. And yeah, the entire fiat monetary system is dependent on people not understanding how that works.
That's
So
right.
it's critical that people come to see this for what it is.
I dare say very few readers who pick this book up are going to understand how fiat money works, because I know I didn't. I had no understanding of it before I started this book. So I'm hoping this will give an education to that our money is not sacred. It's just that we all believe it has value.
Yes.
But you could do the same thing with Bitcoin. If we all believed it had value, it'd be the exact same thing. The only difference is there's a limited amount of it.
Yes.
Which gives each coin greater value. Where with fiat money, it really has no value other than whatever we attest to what it might be.
Yeah. And here's the strange thing about money in my mind is, it's a matter of supply and demand, like any economic good, that determines the price or the purchasing power of the money. But with money, it is the integrity of the supply that drives demand. Like if I'm going to hold my savings in a money, I want to know that it has a predictable supply. That's what gold basically was, right? It was the most inflexibly supplied monetary asset in the world. And what we're saying with Bitcoin is we've discovered or invented a perfectly inflexible money. So it's, when we say belief system, it sounds very arbitrary, like anyone could choose to believe anything is money. And although that is somewhat true, it is objectively constrained. People are going to choose the tool that's best for the job, and the tool that's best for the job is the money that has the most integral supply. So the demand and supply have this reciprocity between them when people choose the money. And I think that's kind of the Bitcoin bull case in a nutshell. People just choose the best tool for the job.
And I went one step further in the novel. My countries chose Bitcoin because they were tired of the United States being in their business. Because once you use the dollar, you bring into all the United States monetary laws come into play. And they didn't want them in their business. So they want them out of their business. So they want to go to something that has nothing to do with the American dollar. And that is a prevalent, that's something that's widespread around the globe, right?
Yes. That's a great point. Yeah. Steve, man, really cool book. Glad you've written this thing. I hope it goes wildly popular and helps orange pill a lot of the world. Is there any closing remarks or anything you'd like to fill us in about the book or otherwise? And if not, if you could just please let people know where they can find you on the internet.
Well, the book is out now in stores all over, in hardcover, ebook, audio. So you can pick it up anywhere, the Atlas Maneuver. Check it out. I'm hoping the Bitcoin people are going to find it interesting. Tell your friends about it. Hopefully they'll read about it too. I have a website, steveberry.org, where you can learn all about me and all my other books. And I hope they enjoy it. I had a lot of fun writing it. I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that we can teach the world a little bit about Bitcoin through this novel.
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.